President Biden rallying Western allies and support for Ukraine during his high-stakes trip overseas. The president today meeting with leaders of the Bucharest Nine, the NATO countries along the alliance's eastern flank closest to Russia.
As NATO's eastern flank, you're on the front lines of our collective defense, and you know better than anyone what's at stake in this conflict, not just for Ukraine, but for the freedom of democracies throughout Europe and around the world. The leaders around this table have repeatedly stepped up to reaffirm our shared commitment to all these values.
Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin today spoke at a pro-war rally in Moscow before a massive crowd there. His remarks coming just a short time after he met with China's top diplomat, who's visiting Moscow and reaffirming Beijing's ties to the Kremlin. So on this, let's bring in ABC News' Ines de La Cuetara in Warsaw, Patrick Reevell in Kyiv, and Elizabeth Schulze here in D.C. Ines, let me begin with you. And with President Biden's meeting with the so-called Bucharest Nine, those frontline countries bordering Russia, they have a long history of conflict with Russia, of Russia invading them, taking them over, splitting them apart. What was President Biden's message to those countries?
Yeah, so President Biden's goal today was really to reassure these allies that the U.S. stands firmly with them. The Bucharest Nine is a group of NATO countries on NATO's eastern flank who are really worried about their own security. Like you say, over the years, these are countries that have dealt with Russian invasions or Soviet influence. And so they feel that if Russian President Vladimir Putin isn't stopped in Ukraine, he could be coming after them next. So these countries have been really vocal in their support of Ukraine. They have been some of Ukraine's biggest supporters, calling for additional aid to be sent to Ukraine. If you look at the fighter jet issue, for instance, I think that's a good example of this, where the U.S. might be reluctant fighter jets it's been asking for, but you do have countries like Poland who have said that they could be ready to leave those warplanes. Ukraine's leader today with Biden talked about how he...
We lost you.
All right, we have a hard time staying connected there with Ines. We'll work on that. But Patrick, let me ask you, as Biden met with the eastern flank NATO allies, Putin held this pro-war rally. Let's talk about what he said and what you make of that event, and just put into perspective, too, the reality of who was there and why they were there.
Hi, Kira. Yeah, I mean, this was this huge rally that President Putin appeared at earlier at Moscow's main stadium. It was basically a concert where pro-war, pro-Kremlin musicians played for a very large crowd of probably tens of thousands, probably around 80,000 at least inside the stadium. And President Putin there again repeated many of the justifications that he's made for the war, again blaming the West and trying to rally Russians around the flag, really. He appeared on stage with members of Russia's armed forces, and I think we can actually play you a clip from that speech.
Есть люди, вот они здесь стоят.
There are people, here they are standing next to me, on the left and on the right. There are people who decide for themselves to protect the most sacred and dearest thing we have, family and homeland.
There you heard Vladimir Putin basically trying to rally Russians around the idea for this war. And that's because, you know, ultimately what we see when we hear from polling within the country is that while Russians generally accept a lot of the rationale for the war, they're not enthusiastic about actually fighting it. Increasingly, polls show around 50% of them want negotiations to begin because they just want to end it because they understand that it's going badly. And I think what's also important to say about this event is that I've been to very similar rallies like this with Vladimir Putin in that stadium, and often the people you meet there have been either given money to come, or they've been pressured by their employers, being told they'll have problems if they don't come. And these are very, very highly choreographed, highly staged events that are most of all for the TV cameras, are about projecting this image that Putin wants. And then again, that's exactly what we were seeing today.
That's a great point, Patrick. Let me go to Elizabeth. You know, Putin also there doing what he's been doing now for 20 years, trying to set up Russia as a different culture. We're for family. We're for tradition. That decadent West we have to fight. And as a demonstration, perhaps, the Russians apparently tested an intercontinental ballistic missile, but it failed. Well, what are you hearing What are the White House officials and other U.S. officials saying about this?
Well, Terry, a U.S. official tells us that failed intercontinental ballistic missile test apparently happened on Saturday. So that was before President Biden made the trip to Ukraine and to Poland. Sources say that the U.S. was provided advance notice about this test, as is protocol, that it wasn't deemed a threat to the U.S. or its allies. And it came, in advance of President Biden's big speech in Poland defending democracy, but also in advance of President Putin's big State of the Nation address to the Russian people. And that's where it's really key that President Putin wanted to send this message. He also, in that speech, withdrew from the remaining nuclear arms treaty with the U.S., and that was something that President Biden today made clear to say that that was a big mistake, singling out Putin for that decision and for making that comment in that speech, Terry.
Yeah, awkward when you fire off the ICBM and it doesn't go anywhere.
Do you think there's anything awkward, really, for Vladimir Putin?
Yeah.
You never know what he's thinking or what he's doing. Elizabeth and Patrick, Ines, thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.